and go back to where we were, which is sort of place us where we are in the book and get us reorganized after a break of time. So we're trying to understand the relation of the perceived subject, of the perceiving subject to the perceived world, as he says at the end of the chapter on the phenomenal, after the experience of the body and objective thought. So we've done that, and we've gotten up to the point where on 83 he says that's what we're trying to understand. And then we tried to understand it first by way of physiology. That's that first chapter. We did that. That's the phantom limb issue. That's the attempt to understand the body as a mechanism in which there are inputs through the nerves that get up to the brain, and then we have something in our mind, and that the phantom limb phenomena just won't fit into that mechanistic picture. In Merleau-Ponty jargon, that's to talk like an empiricist. That's to talk about the in itself, and that whole mechanistic way doesn't work. We can't explain the phantom limb except as being unless we bring in the usual refrain that you've got to get used to. Unless we bring in that we're always already engaged in coping with the world. And I always want to add, in trying to get a maximal grip on the world, though Alva points out to me rightly, no passage I've come across yet quite says that. I do think that's what Merleau-Ponty does say and think at some point. But in any case, we all, I mean, there's no disagreement that what we're trying to do is we're always engaged in trying to cope with whatever it is that comes around. And so that happened, and that happens, we saw in 215, I wonder if I went to a different book. Let's see, maybe I really, no, it couldn't be 215, look at one. It should be, what I'm looking for is something in the body and mechanistic psychology. Where he talks about being in the world. Oh yeah, it's on 215 for the funny reason that it comes back much later. 215 can't be right. Sorry for a minute here, I have to figure out what I was doing when I wrote that. It's 115, but I mean, I just jump ahead to the footnote on 115 to sort of sum up where we are and what happened in the chapter about the phantom limb. He says in a sentence that we've already seen that the phantom limb, which is a modality of the body image, we'll talk about that in a minute, is understood in terms of the general movement of being in the world. This is always going to be the punchline. That whatever the phenomena is that he's going to talk about, he's going to show you that you can't understand it as in itself, that is mechanistically like science, and you can't understand it as for itself, that is in terms of mental operations. You've got to understand it in terms of being in the world. Well, physiology is the mechanical one. Then we have to try psychology, and that's what he does next when he turns to the body as an object, the experience of the body in classical psychology. Psychology naturally has to do with the psyche, with the mental, whereas the physiological had to do with the body like a kind of machine with wires and with nerves instead of wires, but so forth. So then we try to turn, that's what we are now. We're going to switch from empiricist, mechanist, in itself thinking to intellectualist, mentalist, for itself. And we're going to discover, of course, no surprise, that that's going to lead us back into being in the world too. But that's where we are, so I'm going to do that one step by step. Now here, Rick. And we are then now on page 105 for you who have the book we mostly all have. And I don't know what pages that is. What?
90.
90, okay. Now, what's interesting about this chapter to begin with, and I think sort of annoying to us, you all anyway, because you don't have the background to care, is that he starts it with a whole analysis of that he gets from Husserl. And what he's trying to do is not disagree with Husserl. I mean, all that he says here is right. It's good phenomenology. But whenever he talks about Husserl, he always thinks that Husserl has not got to the bottom of it. And he also thinks that Husserl's made it too mental. It just occurs to me that this is an interesting symmetry. Whenever he talks about the Gestalt psychologists, he thinks they've got something important, but they haven't gotten to the bottom of it. And they've made it too naturalized, too physical. And always the answer is, no, they've not gotten to being in the world, which is the really basic way of understanding us and our relation to reality. So what happens here is you just get a kind of summary, starting on 103, of the interesting things that Husserl said about the body, that you can't get it in front of you like an object, that it's something that's sort of on the side of the subject and not on the side of the world, and you can take things over onto the side of the subject if you make them instruments, and the body can do that. And let's see what else here. Well, it gets interesting, really, I think, on 105 at the bottom, when he puts it in strictly Husserlian terms. What prevents it, that's the body, ever being an object, ever being completely constituted, that means something that we can be conscious of all the parts and then synthesize them, put them together. That the body can't be like that. And then he goes on and talks about the special way that the body is never just an object, but it's also, and you can, when you feel one hand with the other, the hand that you're feeling is like an object, it's skin and bones, but the other hand is something like your transparent access to that hand, and that's the body that he's interested in, not the physical body, but what he calls le corps propre in French. I guess that gets translated the lived body. Is that what it gets? I'm not sure. Well, we come across it a lot in French, and I've never thought to look. It's a good thing to look at. I wonder, it's very important, because what we're talking about is always what I say to myself, the lived body. When there's the body as an object, which is, and that's, the body as an object. In German, there's a word for it, Körper. And then there's the body as you are it and experiencing it. In German, they've got a different word for that, Leib. We've only got one word, body.
It's own body.
It's your own body.
Yeah. Okay.
So and it's your own body that we're talking about. And he says how your own body is this access to things. But he describes the access to things is interesting. And he's in a Husserl frame of mind, I think, when he describes the body at the top of 106 as the presence, at the very top of 106, the presence and absence of external objects are only variations with a field of primordial presence, a perceptual domain over which my body exercises power. Now, I think, and I'm going to show you quite a few passages, he doesn't think that the body is a field of primordial presence. That's Husserl. Husserl's still, in the jargon of sort of Derridian stuff, in the metaphysics of presence. And Husserl thinks that what's ultimately present is temporal, the stream of time in consciousness. And Merleau, Ponty, and Heidegger both think that there's something more important than what's present. It's something that's more or less absent. It's the background. It's what's, in Heidegger, what necessarily withdraws in order for us to experience anything. And I think you'll see that when he starts I think you can tell when Merleau-Ponty has switched over to speaking in his own voice instead of Husserl's. He'll stop speaking of the body as any kind of presence, And he'll start speaking of the body, oddly, in very clear language, as having a very special kind of absence all the time. Sort of gets out of the way, so to speak, so that you can be open to whatever you're open to. But let me go through this step by step. So it's a field of presence, he says, on 106. And I think that's all part of, that's not wrong, that it's something that we haven't gotten to the bottom of, and if you had, you wouldn't describe it that way. You would just, and you'll see when we get there that how he would describe it. So it looks like we go beyond Husserl on 107 to it was also said, and that turns out to be more of classical psychology. And the classical psychologies talked about kinesthetic sensations, he says. That is, these body sensations that we have, and these are sensations of our movements, and I can initiate movements on 108. There's something here which is close to getting it right that psychology gets. It's a funny chapter. Psychology gets it almost right, then psychology turns it into something too objective and too mechanical even, and well, not mechanical, but describes it all in terms of mental representations. And then phenomenology comes along and gets Husserl and gets it almost right again. That's what seems to be the way this chapter goes. Because here these people who are them, whoever they are, that he doesn't name, gets it pretty right at the top of 108. I move external objects with the aid of my body, which takes hold of them in one place and shifts them to another. But my body itself I move directly. I do not find it at one point and transfer it to another. I have no need to look for it. It's already with me. I do not need to lead it toward the movement's completion. It is in contact with it from the start and propels itself toward the end. See, that's very close to Merleau-Ponty. That's how my hand is at the doorknob when I get up to start leaving the room. And it's got the same talk. The relation between my decision and my body, it's a different issue. It's interesting. When he says, every once in a while he says things are magical. I better tell you about that. You've got to figure out on your own whether saying that something's magical is saying that it's being thought about in the wrong way, such that you couldn't ever make sense of it. This is an insulting kind of magical. That's what he's saying here, I'm pretty sure. And I'll tell you how. And then magical sometimes means, like the way my hand is at the doorknob when I start, and that nobody's got a brain story about that, or a mind story about that. The only thing you can say about that is, that's the way we are engaged in coping. And then he will say that, and I'll show you some of those, that it's magical. Where magical means he can't understand, and nobody's got even the right way to describe it, but it happens. Here he's saying really, the way they think about it, they think about something which doesn't really happen. And what doesn't really happen? Well, it's that the relation between my decision and my body are, in a movement, magical ones. Now, I think that means that it's an anti-Searle point. I think that means that your intention in action, to talk like Searle, causes you to have a bodily movement. But how something that's mental, in Merleau-Ponty language, the for itself, the cogito, could cause something else that's in the physical world and is mechanical to happen. This whole question of mental causality, he doesn't think makes sense. He thinks that if you get this problem, and it's an insoluble problem, because you start with the decision to act, which is purely mental, and the bodily movement, which is purely physical, and then there's no way to get them together. Later, I wasn't going to mention this yet, so I don't think I can flip through it, but you watch for it. In this, there comes a long footnote in which it's as if he's writing a paper about Searle, in which he says, there's a line where Searle says that the intention action reaches down and governs the bodily movements. And there's a long footnote in here where Merleau-Ponty cites somebody else who says something just like that, and then proceeds to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't, what kind of causality is that? How could this intention, how could this mental thing, what would it even be for it to reach down and govern the bodily movements? So I think in that sense, it's magical, meaning incomprehensible, and I'm pretty sure that's what he's up to here. Yeah?
I think it's a quote from Sartre in the Esquisse of the Theory of Emotions.
Really?
Yes, magie is the way Sartre characterizes what you feel when you're being emotive.
Well, Sartre uses magic too, but not in this particular connection.
Well, the thing is here, I think here Merleau-Ponty uses the Sartrean sense of magic, meaning that you can have an influence on or be influenced by something that's out of reach.
Maybe, but what I got struck by is the relation between my decision and my body.
But you can't explain how.
That's right. Well, at least you can't explain how. Right. Now, I won't settle this now. I leave it to you, or I will tell you next time. I'll bring you a footnote where I think he says that issue isn't unexplainable, it's unintelligible. I mean, that's the question. I mean, is it something? Is it magical because we got the phenomenon correctly described, but we don't know how to explain it? Or does magical mean you got the phenomenon incorrectly described, so you can't hope to explain it? And I believe, and I don't know what this passage says, but I will find you the footnote next time, where he says that the idea that a decision to act can cause a bodily movement is unintelligible from his point of view. And that makes sense to me, anyway. I mean, he wants to say that there's always got to be a much more fundamental way that I'm in touch with my body and always already able to respond to affordances. And then, but before you can have intentions in action that cause bodily movements, and why? I don't know why. We'll wait to get the footnote. I wasn't going to talk about it yet. But it's an interesting possible paper topic. I mean, I'm not going to settle it, or even for anybody who wants to worry about Searle's views of action compared to Merleau-Ponty's views of action. I may have said prematurely, if Olivier's right, it is a problem here. Let me go back to where I was. So we're now in classical psychology in 108. And what he does is, he says they get more and more. Well, first they try to relate the body phenomena to our consciousness of the body phenomena. That's the next stage in the middle of 108. For the living subject, his own body might well be different from all external objects. The fact remains that for the unsituated thought of the psychologist, the experience of the living subject becomes itself an object, far from requiring a fresh definition of being. That means you start studying the experience of being a living subject with a living body, and then that's not Husserl. And it's close to what I said Gervich said, that you always trace it back to whatever you know about the body. It's got to be an object for some sort of consciousness. But he isn't claiming here that it's anybody's phenomenology. He's claiming that this is what psychologists do. And then on 109, they trace my whole experience of my body back to my content of the content of my consciousness of the body, in a way that the body then looks like you've got a representation of it. And then at the top of 110, here's magical again. I wonder which way it's going to go with Olivier's feeling for it or mine. At the bottom of 109, for whereas neither the physicist nor the chemist are the objects of their own investigation, the psychologist was himself, in the nature of the case, the fact which exercised him. This representation of the body, this magical experience which he approached in a detached frame of mind, was himself. He lived it while he thought about it. That turns out to be what? Mistaken? Yes, the psychologist tries to have a detached sort of inventory of the content of consciousness that gives us our experience of the body. And Merleau-Ponty wants to say that that's not right. The psychologist basically is engaged in the world and in moving his body. You have totally distorted it and lost the phenomena if you're looking to see the representations of the body in the mind. And that's, and then this gets finally saved. I mean, I guess. I mean, all of this, remember, is how somehow classical psychology is supposed to be. God gets itself over to having to talk about being in the world. So the next move, but beyond that move of turning it all into consciousness, into the psyche of the psychologist, is to do, I think, Husserl. This is the bottom of 110. The de facto psyche, with its peculiarities, was no longer an event in objective time and in the eternal world. You see, we're making a transcendental move now. Where psychology, where does he say psychology outruns itself? That's what Husserl claimed, that you could start with psychology, and if you did it conscientiously, you'd end up in phenomenology. Where does the psychology outrun itself? So, it's the beginning of a paragraph. Anyway, now, I don't know, but we're about to see psychology outrun itself. I'll read what happens here. And then, but I don't want to spend very long on it because you don't know the Husserl anyway, but you've got to know what he's doing here. The de facto psyche in objective time, with its peculiarities, was no longer an event in objective time and in the external world, but an event with which we were in internal contact, of which we were ourselves the ceaseless accomplishment or upsurge, and which continually gathered within itself, its past, its body, and its world. Before being an objective fact, the union of soul and body has to be then a possibility of consciousness itself. And the question arose as to what the perceiving subject is, if he is able to experience a body as his own. That, I think, is the Gurevich-Husserl move. That's says that there's some primordial kind of consciousness of the body, which is rock bottom and explains all the rest. And now I think he's going to switch it around and turn it into Heidegger at the top of 111. There was no longer a fact passively submitted to that one assumed to be a consciousness, or rather to be an experience. And that's a big switch already, I think. It is to hold inner communion with the world, the body, and other people, to be with them instead of being beside them. To concern oneself with psychology is necessarily to encounter beneath objective thought, which moves among ready-made things, a first opening upon things without which there would be no objective knowledge. Now, I don't know whether my hunch is that he thinks that's Heidegger, not Merleau-Ponty. That it leaves, that's not Husserl, that's Heidegger, not Husserl, that it leaves the talk about consciousness behind and understands us as Dasein, just openness to the world. And he thinks, one thing is sure, he thinks that if you do psychology seriously, you end up with not a talk about how there is in the mind some representation of the body, but that we are neither mind nor body first, basically, but openness to the world, involved coping, period. And I don't know whether he thinks Husserl, do you think he's gone from Husserl to Heidegger there, or he's still in Husserl? I'm not sure. We can talk about it later, I guess.
He's beyond it.
He's what?
Beyond.
Beyond Husserl.
And Heidegger.
And Heidegger. Really? Well, let's talk about that later. I don't think there's anything beyond Heidegger, at least. I don't know what that could be, but you'll have to tell me. That's exciting. Okay, so let's see now where we are. So he wants to turn it in. He's just turned it again into being in the world, though he isn't using that phrase here. But that opening onto things without which there'd be no knowledge, the opening upon things, I think that is another name for being in the world. And so now we get to the spatiality of one's body and motility. And that's going to be the third mode of being. See, it's the usual dialectic in Merleau-Ponty. You've got to keep your mind open for it. First, there was the physiology story, roughly the empiricist mechanist story. Then there was the psychology story, which in some way looked like a mentalist story. Both of them couldn't account for the phenomena until they arrived at something like being in the world, which is, as he sometimes calls it, a third kind of being. It's not a physical body kind of being, and it's not a mental kind of being, and that's what you're supposed to understand when you get to the spatiality of your own body. And he's going to explain why that's the way to approach it, and then he's going to explain why he's going to do it in terms of movement, and then he's going to explain why he's going to do it in terms of the breakdown of movement, a pathological case, namely Schneider. But first, let's just start at the beginning. We're now on, and I'm going to finish this today. Finish. No, I'm not. But I want to finish the introduction. I want to get into the issues around Schneider, and I can do that. Maybe I should stop for a minute, though, because I've just been talking without anybody raising their hand and saying anything. That's an eerie experience. Yeah, really.
Could you just clarify briefly, then, what Husserl was saying as it relates to that chapter and what he got right and what he got wrong?
Okay, well, I'd rather have, I wish Olivier was going to do it, but I mean, as I understand it, Husserl finally gets to the notion of the experience of temporality as more basic than subject or object, something Husserl calls passive synthesis. Is
that constituting or not?
It's passive constitution, he calls it.
So synthesis is constituting?
Yeah, isn't it? It's a kind of constituting. It's a passive kind of constituting.
It's like either William James, the stream of consciousness. But the only difference is that for Husserl, there's a bottom part of the mental life, whatever, that's self-constituting. You know, it's Merleau-Ponty very often quotes or talks about the time that just grabs itself back.
So it's self-organizing. Yeah, let's just say it's self-organizing, and that's in Husserl language a kind of constituting. But let's not talk about this, because I think that's, I mean, if we're going to, it's going to lose everybody, including me.
Okay, well, what's worrying me is that I don't understand Husserl very well, and neither do the students.
That's right.
And I don't. So just what do you think would be the root, basic, important thing
about Husserl?
Yeah.
That he thinks that it is a kind of consciousness where all this gets organized, and though it hasn't come up, he thinks it's a kind of presence. He calls it the living, streaming presence. Consciousness, when it's doing this most basic job, is present to itself. And Merleau-Ponty is going to doubt the presence part. I said I was going to come to that. And he's going to doubt the consciousness part, too. He's going to say that neither of those ways of talking gets at what's really basic, which is this kind of open absence. That's what's really basic. Transcendence, to talk like Heidegger.
So what's Husserl's understanding of the body, then? The body is...
The body is...
the body section.
That doesn't come up in this. I see why you're asking that. Why did he get to the part?
Well, all of these examples about the touching and the touched and the body not as an object is straight out of Husserl.
Yeah, but he's asking. I mean, I think that was clear. If it isn't, it's a good thing to repeat it. This whole phenomenology story of the way the body is incompletely constituted, and you either have pure touching or pure touched, and all that. That's okay, and that's certainly about the body. But when he gets to this final move, when he gets to this move in which there is, before being an objective fact, the union of the soul and the body had to be then a possibility of consciousness itself. The question arose as to what the perceiving subject is if he's able to experience a body as his own. Okay, so this is supposed to be a level at which you can experience everything. And finally, the final level, and among it, you will experience the body as you're about it. But he isn't spelling out Husserl's analysis of how you do that. Okay, and we shouldn't be worrying about it, except that chapter, since you read it, I thought I had to go through and at least tell you something about what was going on there. Well, what's much more interesting and complicated and relevant to understanding things is this next hard chapter, which we're going to read for the rest of today, and Thursday, and Tuesday and Thursday. I put down on the, I hope I put on the syllabus a long time, yes, 4 lectures to talk about this motility chapter. It's so interesting and so hard. But before we go into it at all, I have to make the correction of the translation, which is amazingly misleading. It's consistently misleading, which is already something in its favor, I guess, but it's just plain wrong. And you can see it in your on page 113. He introduces the notion of body image in italics. That's about 25 lines in to the chapter, the spatiality of one's own body. Now, body image is, the French is schéma corporel. It's the body schema. That makes all the difference in the world, because people did talk about a body image, and they meant your picture in your mind of your body, like whether you were fat or thin, and whether you and if you had this kind of body image, you could sort of figure out whether the space you were going to go through was too wide or too narrow for you to go through. But it was always like a picture. That's why it's a body image, a picture of your body that you had in your mind. That's exactly what he doesn't want to talk about. He doesn't think that's interesting at all. And he introduces instead the notion of the body schema. The body schema is something you never directly experience. It's not an image. It's not a description. It's the thing that is so pervasive and hard to talk about in Merleau-Ponty. It's the way your body organizes the world and itself, all at the same time. It's your wonderfully complicated, systematic interrelation of all the various aspects of what you can do and what will show up when you do it. But it's the rest of the book. I mean, don't expect to find out what the body image is right off. Just remember that the body image is and it's outside of consciousness. It's the way your body organizes the world and does it in a way which you don't have to be conscious of at all. The way your eyes solve the problem or manage to see things at a certain distance, for instance, isn't something you think about. Your eyes just do it. But when they do it, they are, in Merleau-Ponty way of talking, reaching a kind of equilibrium, and the body schema is what is constantly organizing things so as to lower attention, reach an equilibrium, get a balance. These are all the kinds of terms he uses. And the know-how we have that enables us to do that, that's the body schema. And so you do not, so every time you see image, you just think body schema or you write body schema. I think it's a good idea just to keep writing it in. But first, see, it would have been okay to use body image the first way he uses it, about 8 lines down. That's ambiguous. If he says body image was first understood to be a compendium of bodily experience, well, that is what body image was that was what body image meant. But what he's trying to say is that that was the bad understanding of what he's trying to call the body schema. That's how it was first, you could say, misunderstood. What he's really saying is the body schema was first misunderstood as a body image. But he is going to consistently use the term body image, because that's body schema, because that's what he's talking about. And so let's read that. So it was, body schema was at first, you can put in there mis, although that's not in the French, it was first misunderstood to mean a compendium of our bodily experience, capable of giving a commentary and meaning to the internal impressions and the impression of possessing a body at any moment. It was supposed to register for me the positional changes of the parts of my body. Oh yes, it's not only a picture of my body, that's important, fat or thin, but it's also a picture of where my body is, so that, in his example, a woman with a tall feather on her hat, because she has this internal picture of not only sort of where how tall her body is, which includes this feather, but where it is, namely going under a low door, automatically will stoop over. That's all body image talk. So it registers the positional changes of the parts of my body for each movement of them and the position of each local stimulus and so forth. And in short, a continual translation into a visual language, see the middle of 113, of the kinesthetic and articular impressions of the moment. Everything's wrong about that from his point of view. One, that when your body's functioning well, it doesn't have any kinesthetic impressions. It becomes completely transparent in your coping, and you certainly aren't going to turn it into a picture of your body, which is what image certainly means. And these guys called it body image, or they also called it, sometimes they called it body. I don't think any of them called it body schema. I wonder. Keep your eye open for that, too. I don't know whether Merleau-Ponty invents the term body schema, does he? He gets it from some of the people in the footnotes.
Yeah, the first footnote of the chapter. It comes from the
Where does the first footnote say? Because these guys that he's citing
It's not
really...
saying that it comes from him, but it comes from him.
But from Schindler? Schindler?
No, head.
Head?
Yes,
Because when they say body image, right? Am I wrong? Or do they
No,
say...
head says body schema.
Does he?
Yeah.
The Schindler says body image, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
He criticizes head.
Okay, good. And Head has it okay. So he gets it from Head, and and you can see why he's for the body schema. Just keep that in mind, and against the body image, and then just keep fixing the translation. Now let's see where we are. Oh, by the way, another one that just comes in front of me, the bottom of 115. The body image, and again, that would be just nonsense if you said it there. The body schema is finally a way of stating that my body is in the world. You see where that is? Right at the bottom, 5 lines from the bottom of 115. I mean, that's to say the body schema is this organized openness that organizes everything, so it's utterly fundamental. The body for Merleau-Ponty just is the body schema, I think. I don't see any big difference between them. I mean, to the point where, as I said before, having a front and a back and up and a down and hands and feet doesn't really play any important role in the phenomenology of perception. You'd hardly notice. The important thing in the phenomenology of perception is that my body organizes the world in response to the organization of the world. Remember, it's this loop. You don't want to make it seem as if somehow the body could do it all by itself. The body schema is the way that my activity is always correlative with the order of the world. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to spend longer on this because we have so much more to get to today, but I thought I understood it, and now you've confused me.
Oh, good. I mean, good. We'll learn something.
Because what I would have said is that the body image is a mental picture of your body.
Yeah.
Whereas the body schema is the implicit way in which your body makes possible ranges of movement. So, for example, I don't need to consult a body image in order to lower my head to avoid a branch when I'm walking. I just simply implicitly understand how my body is shaped without reflecting on the shape, so as to manipulate that shape to avoid an obstacle. But now it sounds like you don't want to say that either. You want to say that it's something much more mysterious.
Much more fundamental and mysterious. Yes, I think that people, I bet Head thinks like this. I mean, that it's our sense of like the feather on the woman's hat. Who does he attribute that to in the footnote? Is it somebody else? I think it is somebody else. It's Head. Okay, so there is this view of the body image or schema for Head, which is the way you implicitly keep track of where your head is and implicitly duck and so forth. But for Merleau-Ponty, I think it's much more basic. And now we have to find out. I mean, maybe it isn't. I mean, I think, as I've just been saying, it does a tremendous job. It explains everything, and everything that goes on gets explained in terms of the body.
But if body schema just means body,
Yeah.
then it's unclear how having a body schema helps us understand anything about being embodied.
Well,
You can understand how a body image plays a role,
Mm-hmm.
and I sort of thought of it as a not possible, like an implicit knowledge of the degrees of freedom you have. You know, you can do this, but you can't do other crazy things.
that could be
So you
part of
never
it.
tried to do those other crazy things.
That could be part of it. I mean, again, if you know the answer to this, tell me. I think it's much broader, though. I think that the perceptual constants finally go back to the body schema, and all the ways we sort of stabilize and organize the perceptual world is a function of the body schema. Am I reading too many things into it? I mean,
Well, I think the body in Merleau articulates both body schema and body image. Because in the next chapter he talks about sexuality and everything, and this is clearly related to the body image.
well, you can well imagine why. I mean, depending on what he's thinking about in sexuality, we'll have to watch that. But the job of organizing perceptual experience, that's not a question of body image. That's the job of the body
He
schema.
relates the body schema to the world, as always, because he says you can't.
That's right, but that could be neutral. I mean, is the body schema like the world because it's a picture of my body and its relation to the world?
It's the structure of interaction.
Okay, well that's good. Well, that's what I think. But then it's much more than just keeping track of where my body is.
Yeah, that's true, but this is what Alva said. It works with what Alva said.
Yes, it does. Well, that's a special case of it, I want to say. That's right. And then the way somebody had, I guess, first came across it, but he's going to generalize it, Merleau-Ponty.
Yes, because for that it's only the postural
Right.
sense.
Right. And for Merleau-Ponty, it's really everything. I mean, there's nothing else to the body but the body schema, really, for Merleau-Ponty.
And he articulates it with the fact that there, as Rousseau says, that there's an absolute here from where all the perspectives stem. So,
Right.
And Merleau-Ponty articulates the body schema and this being the center of possible actions.
That's right. Okay. Being the center of possible actions, where actions means things I sort of do as an agent, but it also means centers of all sorts of stuff that I don't do as an agent, that I'm not aware of at all, that my body is doing. That's still body schema work. Okay, I think that's fine. Just bear this all in mind, and keep, as you see him using it, you'll get used to it. Let's see now. So I'm on one. Wait a minute. Yeah, I got to catch up. So the body schema, not a picture, not kinesthetic sensations. Oh yeah, there's a way. He goes through 3 ways of understanding the body schema. Let's do it. Maybe we'll get it clearer if we actually look. The first one we've already done. It's the visual one. You convert it into a visual language. It's an actual kind of picture of the body. That's on page 113. And then now I'm doing my sort of interpreting. And then it looks like there's a Gestalt version of it on 114, and he says it is a Gestalt version. And you'll expect that to be half right and half wrong. And let's see if it works. On 114, he says, about 15 lines down, it is in some way anterior to them. What? I got to back up enough. Way back. If a need was felt to introduce this new word, that's about 10 lines down. That's the body schema. It was in order to make it clear that the spatial and temporal unity, the intersensory, or the sensory motor unity of the body is, so to speak, de jure, that is necessary. That it is not confined to contents actually and fortuitously associated in the course of our experience. That would be empiricist. That it is in some way anterior to them and makes their association possible. Well, that's always what being in the world level does. We are therefore feeling our way towards a second definition of the body image. It is no longer seen as a straightforward result of associations established during experience, but a total awareness of my posture in the intersensory world, a form in the sense of Gestalt psychology. Well, good. That's really the Alva version, I think. That's got to do with the sort of actual stance of my actual body. And that's not wrong. And that's what the Gestaltist has. Is Head a Gestaltist by any chance? No. No, because I don't know who he's thinking of there. Well, he's got a footnote. Conrad, another one on the corpus schema. Okay. Now, about that I want to say, well, what's wrong with this story? Well, it's the typical, I think, objection to the Gestalt people that the body schema is being defined apart from the world. It's being described as something that I'm aware of in my body, in my posture, and we aren't hearing about its role in organizing the world in the second definition. So we got to go into the third definition. That the body, yeah.
I don't understand what's wrong with the second definition. What does he say is wrong?
Well, I think what's wrong with it is, does he say what's wrong with it? Let's see. I'm saying what's wrong with it because I think it's always the Gestalt mistake. But let's see. But already the second definition is superseded by the analysis of the psychologist. It's inadequate to say my body is a form. That is to say, a phenomenon in which the totality takes precedence over the part. How is such a phenomenon possible? Because of form and so forth and so forth.
He says what you just said.
He does say it.
Yes.
Where?
Just a few lines down.
Read it.
Well, I know the French.
Okay, but tell me where then.
It's just before the second footnote. The psychologists say, say that the body scheme is dynamic.
Oh yeah, okay. Psychologists often say that the body scheme at the bottom of 114 is dynamic. Brought down to a precise sense, this term means that my body appears to me as an attitude directed toward a certain existing of a possible task. Wait, is that?
Related to the world.
Yeah, but that's the third version now. He's gone on from the Gestaltist to his existential.
Right.
Oh, okay, we're agreeing. Yeah, the Gestaltists got something. They got the whole defining the elements somehow, but they leave out existence. That's what's always wrong with the Gestaltists. They don't have the engaged, coping, directedness of the body. They have it in what he calls this economy of energy, that the body is this energy trying to come to equilibrium by itself, so to speak. And he's always got, remember I said this, it's very important, he's got a bigger Gestalt than the Gestaltist. It's the body-world combination Gestalt. And then you've got to go on, because the body schema so far is just this holistic body thing. But now he wants to say it's this directedness toward a certain existing a possible task. And now we're at Merleau-Ponty. He put back in his usual existentialist mood. Remember, this is existential phenomenology. That's always going to be around. Okay, those are the three definitions. And he talks about it at length, in an interesting way that's going to become very important in the motility chapter. He says, well, I'll read this whole thing, about 10 lines down on 115. Well, it's funny. I guess that's not going to be obvious what it means. But anyway, he wants to say that I know where, and this sounds more like what Alva was saying, I know where my arm, when I hold my pipe, I don't have to think about it. I've just got a sense of where my pipe is, and I know where my hand and body are, but I know them in a way that isn't knowing that anything. It's the way the primitive people know their way around in the desert. And so let me go on. The word here, I'm now in the middle of 115, applied to my body does not refer to a determinate position in relation to other positions or to external coordinates. But now comes the interesting thing. The laying down of the first coordinates, the anchoring of the active body in an object, the situation of the body in face of its tasks. Well, there it is again, the existentialist story. What you get finally is not just a sense of where your arm is and your pipe is and you are standing and all that, which is not wrong, but that's what had. But you get the existentialist thing, this very important thing that he calls the anchoring of the active body. As I say, that won't become clear until you get to the space, the motility the motion chapter, but this is motility, but there's a motion. Is it in this chapter? Maybe it is. Anyway, you'll hear that in order to see movement, that's going to be different. That's in a different chapter. This is about my moving the body. But in order to see movement, it's important to know where the body is anchored. I'll give you a clue. What he's talking about here is this thing about whether if you're in a train and the other train next to you starts to move, you think your train is moved. Your body is always anchored somewhere in the sense that it determines that here is and what's moving or not. He says if you're looking through the window of the train at the other people's train trying to read the newspaper over their shoulder or something, then your body is anchored over there. And then you'll see that train is moving and not yours. So, and it's interesting. That means that this business of where your body is anchored isn't where your physical body is sitting. Where body again means your capacity for coping, and if your capacity for coping is engaged with the neighbor's newspaper in the other car of the train, that's where your body schema has anchored you. And if you're engaged in the usual paying attention to what's in your car of the train, then that's where you're anchored. And wherever you're anchored, that's what's going to seem to move when there are two movements going on. So that's going to be important, but that's not important yet. So let me go back to where I am. The anchoring of the active body in the object. That's like, are you reading your newspaper in your car or over somebody's shoulder in the next? So the anchor in the object, the situation of the body in the face of its tasks. Okay, that's the right meaning of body schema. Now, I have to see what's happening here.
But that can't quite be right.
Right.
Because when you're disengaged from task, you don't lose your anchoring in the body or your sense of where you are. If you're sitting in the dark, you don't lose a sense of what's up and down or left or right. So rather, you have a sense of what's up or down and left or right, which you can put to use when you are engaged in tasks. It's not
that's certainly not his view. That's not his. You're saying that's what he should have said. Is that right?
Well,
I don't think he believes that.
I don't see much here that speaks against what I just said.
No, I don't either. Not here. But but it doesn't fit my feel to the position, because it suggests that somehow where you are doesn't come back to you from the world enough. You only know where you are, and your body schema tells you this by your, he thinks, active involvement with something. But now I'm trying to think, and you are in a way wherever you're actively involved. And now Alva raises the question, suppose you're not actively involved. Suppose you're just sitting contemplating, or you're in the dark, and now what? I'm just going to talk off the top of my head. My hunch is he's going to say, that's a derivative, privative form of my experience of location and my experience of up and down and right and left that only could be had if you had this engaged experience of up and down and front and back and anchored, and then you could get somewhere by leaving. There would be some residue if you left some out. You think? What do you think?
Well, I'm going to go back. No, you go on with that, but I want to go back a step.
Okay, go back a step.
Yeah, I don't understand the train example. If you're anchored in the train next to you, when the train starts to move, you get a veridical perception of the train actually moving.
That's right.
If you're anchored in the train in which you actually are,
yeah.
You have an illusion.
Yes, you have an illusion. You've had this happen too, that suddenly your train is pulling out of the station and you get very confused, and then you reorient and you realize, no, your train is just sitting there like it was, but it's the train next to you that's moving. But your first thing is an illusion, yeah. Why?
Why?
Okay, well, good. I don't know. Let me think. Although maybe I'm going to have to put this off to the movement chapter, but let me think. Why? You're anchored in the train.
You have to ask you why
Yeah,
it looks like you're moving when you're not.
Well,
Yeah, why do you have this illusion? By being anchored in your car, there is a train. Let's just try to think it out. There is obviously motion. something is moving. Either you're moving or the train next to you is moving. Movement, sort of moving is what is what's
Because here
strikes you.
is a revolving target on this account.
Who? What?
Here is where your perception is.
That's right. Here is where
And
you're
why
coping.
you have a veridical experience in one and an illusion in the other.
Okay, well,
Here
Here is where you're coping, and here you
is
are
where
on
you're
this.
coping. I mean,
Here
it
you
should
are.
be a stable.
Well, what makes it veridical in the one case is that you're in a moving train. And what makes it non-veridical
No,
is
no,
that
no,
there's
you're
other
not in a moving train.
No,
You're
when it's
looking over
veridical.
at it. And
No, but then it's not veridical.
yeah,
When-
it is, because you're seeing it, and it actually is then moving. But when you're in the train,
Oh, I
kinda
see.
like, yeah,
Okay.
then
Okay.
you get the illusion that the train you're actually in.
Yeah. Well, let me try to figure it out. Now you're.
But that's because the visual flow out your window is the same that it would be if you were moving. So you don't have any bodily sensation of movement, which is why it's actually, you can often tell that it's not really.
You get
That's your account.
That's what sort of wakes you up and makes you rethink, because you.
It's a sort of vestibular effect. But
My question then is more abstract, is the body, I'm bringing it back to the body schema, the anchoring of the here. Your account is right, because then you experience the movement and you readjust. I understand why you have an illusion you don't in the other, but here we're talking about what
Okay,
body schema does.
I think it's this simple, but let me try, and if you, maybe it'll collapse, that there is, something's moving, and you are assuming that whatever's happening is happening where you're engaged. And if you're engaged in doing something in this car of the train, and the visual stuff is exactly like something is moving, you assume that it's moving. You don't even consciously assume it. You just, there's movement going on, and this is where it must be going on, because this is where my engaged activity is going on. Everything is going on. And if you then put your attention into the other car, then you get and there's still something moving. And now you say something's moving. It's where where my interest is anchored, and I'm anchored in the other car. The other car must be moving. Now, then, to find out objectively what's going on, you have to sort of get yourself out of all this and take account of other stuff.
So then you have the analytic perception you pull out.
That's right. Good.
Okay, got
Yeah,
it.
that's it. You pull out and you look at like whether you feel the bounces of the
Right.
train, or what you really look at is whether the markers in the train station are moving. And you say, aha, it's not me. We're not moving. They're just staying right outside the window. Okay, well, that was helpful, and that'll help you when you get to the moving chapter, if you ever make it that far.
Just one very brief comment
Yeah.
on the other point.
Yeah.
Very brief, which is that maybe you're right in the way you're reading it, but there's at least another contrast going on in the very same passages, which is between discursive and non-discursive ways of knowing where you are. And that seems to be getting the most emphasis to me. So he says, I know immediately the position of my hand. It's not determined discursively by the angle which it makes with my forearm, and my forearm with my upper arm, and my upper arm with my trunk, and my trunk with the ground. I know indubitably where my pipe is. And he says, as primitive man in the desert is always able to take his bearings immediately without having to cast his mind back and add up distances covered in deviations made since setting off. So what he wants to say is that we have an access to, we have the ability to use the word here that does not refer to any kind of, does not depend on any calculation or refer to a determinate
That's right.
external position.
That's true. And he doesn't go back on that. And that's we do that. And when we get to Schneider, we see that even Schneider can do that. But there's something more basic that we do, and that's this business of anchoring where we are by way of our involvement. That's why I was emphasizing that. It's the body schema. If it's a question of whether there's two things the body schema can do, and you're talking about one of them, and I'm talking about one of them. One of them is whether you're involved or not, you can have a sense of where your body is and where the parts of your body are without having to think about them or pick them out or experiencing them. And that's done by the body schema. Then there is the being in the world, what opens the world to you and organizes it for you. And that's done by the body schema too, in its coping role. And so and that's all right. I mean, you've got to have both of them. I think there's some kind of claim going to come up with Schneider that the being in the world function of the body schema, yeah, this is surely right, has to be more basic than knowing where your parts of your body are, use of the body schema, because Schneider knows where the parts of his body are. He can grasp them, but he can't point at them. And when he can grasp his nose, but he can't point at his nose. He can swat a mosquito, but he can't tell where you're pointing if you haven't touched him there. That's because he's lacking the involved coping kind use of the body schema. Let me see if I can put those pieces together. I doubt it. Let's see. No, I can't explain it yet.
What he refers to the speciality of situation that Ponty talks about on page 115. This is it.
Oh, what I'm trying to think?
Yeah.
Okay, where am I trying to... Where is it?
Well, when you contrast speciality of position and speciality of situation.
Ah, that's good. Is that on 115?
115 in the French edition?
No,
No, it's right.
It's in italics.
Page 115 of your edition?
Yeah.
In italics. I'm staring right at 115 and I'm not seeing it. But I'm glad to hear it. Why don't I just read it and see what happens? So it's this... So the anchoring thing. But let's go on. Body space can be distinguished from external space and envelops its parts instead of spreading them out because it is. There's so many things to say at once now. The darkness needed in the theater to show up the performance. Notice, I have to stop and comment on that. I won't forget where we are. But that's just the opposite of the presence story. I said, finally the body scheme is going to turn out to be what's not present. The darkness in the theater, the absence of any experience, which opens you up to all the other experiences. That's starting there, and this will come up again and again. In the theater, the background of somnolescence or reserve, a vague power against which the gesture and its aim stand out. Now comes the whopper, the zone of not being. That's as far as you can get from pure presence, I think. The zone of not being in front of which precise beings, figures, and points can come to light. In the last analysis, if my body can be a form, and if there can be in front of it important figures against indifferent backgrounds, this occurs in virtue of its being polarized by its tasks. You see, there we are again, of its existence towards them, of its collecting together of itself in its pursuit of its aims. The body schema is finally a way of stating that my body is in the world. And that's the move. I mean, sitting there in the dark, it's a perfectly good objection or counterexample, or sitting there and contemplating has got to be, on this story, though I don't know what the argument is, a privative form of the body schema as involved anchoring and coping in the world. And somehow, when you stop being anchored and involved in coping in the world, you'll still have a residue that you can use to find out where you are. Just like you can stop being engaged in the train here or the train next door and start being objective about which train is moving. But it's all, I don't know, does he say it? You're always helpful. He should be saying somewhere that this is more basic than any sense you have directly of the whole of your body and where it is and so forth. It's always
yes,
just...
It says on page 289, but it's in the French edition. So
well, let's go to it.
The same page.
The same page?
Yeah, almost.
Where I am already?
No. About the same number in English. About
289, you said?
Yeah.
In French.
289 is 250 in my book and 291 in everybody else's.
Whoa. How do you find those things? That's wonderful. Whatever it is. Now, where on... Now,
That's a really good memory.
oh, boy. That's what happens when you studied a long time.
It says what matters for the orientation of the spectacle is not my body in the way it's being made as a thing in the objective space, but my body as a system of possible actions, a virtual body.
That's great. But wait, stop long enough for us to find. Anybody found this?
8 lines down.
How many?
7 lines down.
Okay.
What counts for the orientation?
I still haven't got it. I'm bad at this sort of thing. Oh, got it. Okay. Yeah. Okay, let me just catch up. Okay, but a system, I'll read it from now on, okay? But a system of possible actions, a virtual body with its phenomenal place defined by its task and situation. Yep, the same thing again. You're absolutely right. I mean, I don't know if it yet answers Alva sort of how you can still have a sense of space and place and body when you stop it. But let's focus on this. That's to say that the body schema, remember that's what it's called, is this system of possible actions, and which are always defined vis-a-vis some particular engagement in a situation.
But you're adding that in.
No. That's defined by its task and situation.
There's something to be done.
What?
I don't know the English.
What?
My body is where there's something.
Yeah, okay, good. My body is wherever there is something to be done, right. Which means, in the car next door, if you're reading over somebody's shoulder, that's where your body is. Your body isn't where this physical thing is. It's whatever you're engaged in coping with.
It implies a sense of up and down and everything, but it's enveloped in a bigger thing that's what's to be done.
Right. It's enveloped in the bigger what's to be done, yeah.
Does it imply that in the case of the phantom limb, it wouldn't be experienced in the dark room situation?
In the phantom, I don't understand the question yet. Say it again.
If the body experience is only when there is something to be done,
Yeah?
then the phantom limb is not experienced.
Oh, when there's nothing to be done. Interesting. So we all agree, let's go back, the phantom limb is experienced when there's something to be done. When somebody comes in, your friend, and you want to walk and greet them, you have a phantom leg and you get up and fall on your face. But now, and what about when you're just sitting there and you're not trying to walk anywhere? Is the phantom limb, I know the answer from the phenomena. As long as the floor looks walkable on, it's the affordance story, you've got the phantom limb. And that's already a kind of involvement. I mean, if you saw the floor as just a solid, a flat black surface, and you'd probably still have a phantom limb, but you shouldn't. I don't know what to say about that. But as long as you're seeing the floor as soliciting walking on, you're going to have a phantom limb, even if at the moment nobody's come in that's attracting you to walk. Now, the fact that you still have a phantom limb, I bet, when there's, even when you're just contemplating the floor, if you could do that, I think you could, just like a painter trying to look at the colors in it, that's not going to make your phantom limb go away. That would be an amazing cure for phantom limb. And then I think Merleau's going to have, Ponty's going to have to bring in habit and background, which are not immediately influenced by the current situation, and they're going to keep the phantom limb in the circuit of existence, to quote like him, even when you're not particularly, when you're not involved in doing anything.
So that goes back to Alva's question that there is no such situation as darkness?
Good. That's very interesting. The two of you are setting up a fascinating problem. I think it does. I think that's when I said, you're making me spell out what I mean by well, no, I think you're doing a better job than I was. You're making me change my mind in a way. It's to say that, I mean, I was always uneasy about it. It's always a sleazy move to say, well, there's something left which is a privative, derivative form of what you had before, and your body location and so forth is just this sort of lesser, abstracter thing. I didn't feel right about that. Now, I think what you've got me to say is, even when you're sitting there not doing anything, you've got a kind of residual, but it's a different kind now, a concrete, not an abstract, sense of the floor is something you could be walking on, and the door is something you could be going out. The things are still around you, correlated with your body schema, and that's why you still know, where you are and what your body is like, and they don't go away now we have to say something like, because they're in the background, not on, based on what you're consciously paying attention to, and they're habitual, and they therefore, that's a good answer, better answer, give you the possibility of doing this sort of in the dark, still knowing where you are, contemplating, still knowing where you are, on the background of your engagement. I mean, it had to be coming out on the background of your engagement, but I like it better to say it your way than to say it my
I
way.
think I'm not saying it because what you're really saying is that your sense of where you are is given in terms of the possibilities of what you can do. But the possibilities of what you can do are present whatever you're engaged in. Because they're possibilities, not
No, I don't think, though, that they're just possibilities. This is the issue we have every once in a while.
The possibilities stem from your being in the situation. This is why he draws the attention on the primacy of the situational space.
I'm looking for the evidence that he does do that.
Wait, let me hear
The
that.
passage you gave didn't support that.
Okay. So,
He says, listen, he says, what counts for the orientation of the spectacle? Now he's talking about the spectacle, not me. Is not my body, as it in fact is, as a thing in objective space, but as a system of possible actions of virtual bodies with its phenomenal place defined by its task and situation. So he mentions task and situation, but not with the specificity that suggests that if he was hungry or if he was whatever, that would make a difference.
okay, yeah, Eric.
But this is very clear on page 115 of the English version that we have, that the body schema is something task-directed. He says it.
That body schema is something that's directed, is that what you're saying?
Task-directed.
Task-directed, yeah.
He says he refers to the situational position below to the being in front of the task and later on existing towards the task. And it's all about the dynamic body schema, how we say.
Yeah, I think another way to put it, maybe, I don't know how much I'm stretching things, you have to sort of see. What do you think? I mean, I think it's got, if you're sitting alone, sort of contemplating, that's a task too. I mean, you don't fall off the chair.
It's peculiar task, but
What?
peculiar task, but you can do it.
Yes, yes, and it better be a task, because if you just fell asleep, you'd fall off your chair. It's a job to be doing nothing, given the way the world is set up with the gravity and all that. I think that must be important
It's
in
a
the
choice, and
story.
this is what corresponds to one of the virtualities of the situation.
Okay, I guess so. But the virtualities, we're back to worrying about what Alva's saying. Yeah, are the virtualities just other possibilities that you understand?
They are possibilities, and you stand in one of them.
Yeah,
If you're
but-
not like Schneider, you can swap from
Yeah,
one to another.
but the important thing you've got to bring in is that they're not just possibilities you could understand, but they're possibilities that you are already on the horizon, to talk like him, of the possibilities you're actually activating.
They correspond to the body.
Right, right. But I mean, what I want to stress is, because this issue about possibility, they're not, I think he would say, mere possibilities. They're not possibilities that you just sort of entertain like a mind. They
They're not
are
logical possibilities, they're concrete possibilities.
they're concrete possibilities,
This is what
which,
virtual means.
and I want to say,
In his use of it.
okay, well, and here's how I want you to think about it. At least here's how I think about it. You may not want to. I mean, that when he says that these other possibilities are on the horizon of the current one, he means that the current one would be experienced differently if it weren't for these other ones. They're already in there. That's the crucial thing. So when he says, for instance, that I'd be experiencing you all and the room differently if I thought there was a chasm behind me, if I believed it. I mean, belief is too weak. But if I were in the, if I thought somehow, if I got myself into the situation of a chasm behind me, there would be, everything would look different. It wouldn't be as if I would have one more idea, one more belief that if I step back I'm going to fall into a hole, but I would see all you as staring into this chasm and worrying about me falling into the hole, because it would be on the horizon of everything else I saw that there was this chasm behind me. Then that's this virtual part. So whenever you're experiencing any particular task, a lot of other tasks are there as tasks you could turn to. And now everything depends on this idea, and that means that your particular task is looking like it's one in a system of tasks of which you you could turn to. You notice this is the front of the house and back of the house issue again that Alva and I always have. I mean, this is to say the front of the house, even when you're not going around the back of the house, and don't intend to go around the back of the house, don't even care about the back of the house, looks like it looks because it's on the horizon of it, that's something you could do. And if you thought you were in front of a facade, then it wouldn't look like that. And that's not just having two different views of what's possible to do. That's having a different experience right on of the something or other as either the front of a house or a facade. We're back to that again. And this is important. This conversation has been very important to understand something which I wouldn't have been able to explain. And now I will be able to explain it, and you'll be able to understand it. When you get to Schneider, I'm just going to tell you, it's very important that Schneider can do the things that we would call responding to affordances. He can slap a mosquito bite, light his cigarette. When you put the scissors and thread in front of him, he can make the wallets. And it sounds just like, when you read it, well, then what's wrong with him? He's got the engaged attitude, and he's full of responsiveness to affordances, and yet he lacks something crucial. And the crucial thing he lacks, Merleau-Ponty says, is that these affordances are not on the background of the world, or don't have other possible actions as their horizon, or let's see what other ways just to talk about it. He's locked into them, and so forth. And I couldn't understand what that meant. That was just words to me this morning about 2 hours ago. But I now see that means that the scissors are going to look different to him because they're not going to have in them that they are in a system of other possible actions. And that's what he lacks. He's like the Gestaltists. He's got the Gestalt business of responding to affordances, of completing a whole, and so forth, but he hasn't got the kind of engaged activity of a whole body schema engaged with a whole world, which makes this particular engaged activity open to other engaged activities. I think that's the way to think about him. When you're going to read now, I'm going to stop in a second, you're going to read now the Schneider part. It starts, he doesn't say Schneider right away, but I want so you don't know what I'm talking about exactly. So I better tell you what I'm talking about exactly. As soon as he gets going in this chapter, 118, he says...
It's in the footnote they mentioned
Schneider. A patient, yeah, 118, a patient, and that's Gail Goldstein's account of Schneider. And I've got to tell you more, one more thing. This is a very hard chapter to read. I would have told you this at the end of the hour, but this is the end of the hour. It's a very hard chapter to read once you stop talking about the phenomena, which is what I wanted to talk about today, and we did a lot, and that's very important. Because the hard part is that he thinks Gail Goldstein have got it half right, just like he thinks Husserl's got it half right, and the Gestaltists have got it half right, and sometimes he's writing within Gail Goldstein's analysis, and sometimes he's telling you what's wrong with it. So keep these words in mind. When Gail Goldstein are talking, they're always talking about concrete and abstract attitudes. And what's wrong with Schneider is that he lacks the right kinds of concrete. He lacks the right kind of concrete and abstract attitude, or he lacks them, or something, doesn't matter what. When Merleau-Ponty is talking about Schneider, he's saying, no, that's too superficial. Schneider lacks being in the world. If you keep that in mind, you could get through this very hard text, because it's the worst part of the book for not knowing where Merleau-Ponty is agreeing and where he's disagreeing. And the answer is, when he's talking about abstract and concrete attitudes, he's half agreeing. He's saying, well, that's sort of, you're getting it almost, but you haven't really got it right. And then he's going to always come up with his story. Okay, that'll help. Okay, we're going to be now in Schneider stuff for the next several days.
If you're a student of mine, I didn't have office hours yesterday since it was a holiday.